Thanks, John. Um, Today, I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about George Wright and Albert Spalding. And as John mentioned, I've spent a fair amount of time digging deeply into both characters. I know George Wright would be pleased with the vote that was taken on the previous panel to say that the National Association was indeed a major league. Spalding certainly, but Spalding was on to bigger and better things. So you take a look at these guys, and what you see here is a picture of two individuals in 1910, Albert Spalding on the right, George Wright on the left, at the end, the twilight of their baseball existence. Spalding would live for another 5 years, pass away in 1915. George Wright would live until 1937. He was 90 years old when he finally passed away, just a couple months short of being inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. What I really want to do with this presentation is talk about their books, their journals, what they published, and really, as we know, as researchers and as writers, a lot of this really shows what they were thinking and what they were like as people related to baseball and related to the bigger world of sports. So I'd like to go to the next slide just to say, I'd like to thank the research committee for having me involved here, but I'd also like to thank the co-chairs for, under some pretty trying circumstances over the past year, putting together a conference that really is going to keep the Fred going and the standards that we expect. So thank you for making that happen. Communication of sports. Back in the mid 1800s, what were the ways that sports scenes were communicated? Either verbally, you'd go to a game and you'd tell your friends and your neighbors about what you saw and the excitement that you saw there. The other way was the written word, of course, and that was in two particular manners. One, newspapers, either daily newspapers or weeklies. People like Henry Chadwick and others would write about the game, talk about what they saw, and maybe about what they expected of ball players and the game in the future. Journals were also an important way to get information, written information on baseball. The journals that were out there, whether it was Porter's Spirit of the Times in the 1850s or the New York Clipper, they talked about sports in general. Baseball was included in that, but sports like boxing and horse racing, yachting, and race walking, and a whole host of different types of sports, baseball included. But they also talked about the theater, they talked about literature, reviews of what people either hadn't read or hadn't seen in person. They'd give you an update on what was happening out there in the world of what you might call amusements, different types of entertainment for people who might spend a dime or a quarter to either attend a sports event in person or to buy a book or go to a theater show. So there were particular communications that were out there, not as our internet or our instant communications can give us, but something that you could see on a daily or periodic basis. Now, the first early baseball guide came out in 1859, the Pocket Companion. And what was interesting about the baseball guides, first this particular guide and then others, was that they wanted to explain to the public what were the rules and regulations of this game called baseball. What was interesting was in the Baseball Player's Pocket Companion, they talked about two particular versions of baseball. They talked about the Massachusetts game and they talked about the New York game. And what was, in my view, quite interesting was how they laid out these two games so someone who wasn't familiar with baseball could compare and contrast. What was this Massachusetts game? What was the game of the New Yorkers played? And why would you want to play one versus the other? And When you take a look at what they explained in a couple of short pages and a couple of diagrams, what you saw was the Massachusetts game was a game that was quite different from the New York game. Not only was it played on a square field versus the diamond of the New York game, but there were a couple of significant differences that spoke to how the game was played. The game on the Massachusetts side was one where the pitcher was 30 feet away from the striker and pitched overhand, sort of a decided disadvantage to the striker. The game from the New York side, pitcher was 45 feet away and pitched underhand, maybe a little bit more of an advantage for the striker. When the ball was hit into the air, into the outfield in the Massachusetts game, if you didn't catch the ball on the fly, it wasn't an out. In the New York game, when the ball was hit to the outfield, it could be caught on the fly for an out, or the fielder could choose to catch it on one bounce, and that would be an out as well. A point on the Massachusetts game, which was really interesting to me, was that it took 100 runs to win the game. In the New York game, an agreed to number of innings was played. Whoever had the most runs at the end of that, usually 9 innings, was declared the winner. That meant the New York game could be played in 2.5, 3 hours. The Massachusetts game could take a day, might take half a day, could take a day and a half, could continue for a long time. So when you take a look at these two being presented, what you saw was a clear option for which type of game people wanted to play if they chose one. And you could see that it was a little easier to play the New York game. And if you were out there to try to market a sport, you probably wanted more people who weren't as professional, if you will, not being paid, but who weren't as skilled to be able to play in a game that was a little bit easier to play. And of course, we all know the New York game won out. Well, there were more guides that were published in the 1860s. Beatles and DeWitt's were two big ones. And of course, they covered history of the game, rules and regulations. They talked about meetings that took place the previous year, as well as games that took place, maybe some rudimentary statistics and some beginnings of box scores. But they tried to get across to the public what was going on in the way of baseball. Our first professional superstars in the sport, George Wright and Albert Spalding, got involved not only on the field, but off the field in terms of what they were offering in written form for understanding baseball. I'm going to give a little thumbnail sketch, not to read through this, but to show that George Wright indeed was a superlative ball player from a defensive standpoint, as revolutionizing the shortstop position, but also as a hitter and as a leader, as he led the Providence Grays to a title in 1879. Wright was involved in 8 years from 1872 to 79 in winning 7 titles. If that wasn't superlative performance and being on a superlative team, I don't know what is. In 1879, he also founded a sporting goods operation called Wright and Ditson, but he'd been involved in sporting goods for 11 years before that. He was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1937, as I mentioned, and certainly well-deserved. Spalding was, on the other hand, a pitcher, and he was a superlative pitcher. In the early goings for Spalding, when he was only 16 years old, the Forest Cities that he played on beat, in an upset victory, beat the Washington Nationals of George Wright. As he pitched through the 1870s, his winning percentage was close to 800. Think of that in today's terms. Pitchers that can win close to 80% of their games, unheard of. Yet, here's Spalding, who was able to do it both in the National Association and the National League in its first year of existence when he led the Chicago White Stockings to the first title in the National League. And in that year, he also founded a sporting goods company with his brother, 19-year-old Walter. These were young entrepreneurial guys trying to take advantage of what was out there in the marketplace related to the public that was hungry to play sports or to watch sports or to do both. He led a promotional tour like no other in 1888 and 1889. He took the Chicago White Stockings and the and all America's all-star team around the world to demonstrate America's national game. He was selected to the Baseball Hall of Fame for all of this in 1939. Now, George Wright decided beyond playing baseball, he wanted to bring baseball to people in the general public in a manner that could help them understand the game and maybe understand how to play it better. His first book that he put out was all of 52 pages. It was ghostwritten, and it talked about standard type of baseball guide issues, season summaries, box scores, some statistics, those types of things. Here's a nice picture of George on the cover of his book. But what he really wanted to talk about were the players themselves. He wanted to personalize these players to the public so that they could see that these guys were, in certain respects, sort of like you and me. They could play the game, we could play the game and enjoy it, either watching it or playing it. Now, in his 9 pages of 52-page book, he talked about 19 players who were on the Boston Red Stockings from 1871 to 74. And he had these types of descriptions, a paragraph or two that tried to humanize a little bit who these people were. Let's take a look at what he said about himself in 1871. He was pretty modest. It's conceded on every hand that George Wright is the kingpin of baseball players. He stands at the head of shortstops. He's an excellent base runner. He's a great fielder, et cetera, et cetera. He even talked about, in the last paragraph of his description, George Wright is 5 feet 9 3/4 inches tall and weighs 160 pounds. Why would he put that in there? Just to say he's like you and me. The average height of a ball player was 5'8" or 5'9". They weighed about 150, 160 pounds on average. So this was a humanization of the sport to people who are out there trying to understand, gee, can I play it? I wonder if I have the capabilities. The next year, George Wright did something even more different. He published a book and he just said, look, this is my book on 1875. Okay, I'm going to tell you things that you may want to know, but I'm going to tell you some unique things that will help you play the game of baseball. Imagine there's a book, it's 29 pages. It's a glorified journal of sorts. Again, he talks about scores and summaries of games. He gives some statistics, talks about the Red Stockings making some money in 1874, which was unusual for baseball teams at that time. He also says that Harry Wright's venture of taking the 1874 Boston Red Stockings out to England to show baseball to the English as a worthy sport to cricket was something that didn't make money at the time. And so he basically said, look, even though we didn't make money, it was good to get that game out there. But then George did something completely different. He wrote about what he called his baseball. It was a photo image of 12 different pictures where he taught people how to play baseball. Look on the top and you'll see George Wright and also Ross Barnes demonstrating how to hit the ball. In the middle is George Wright and Ross talking about how to catch a ball. On the bottom is George and Ross explaining how to field and throw the ball. In addition to these pictures, what accompanied each item was a particular description going along with the picture. In image number 2, you'll see it's second from the top on the left. That's George, and the description was hit sharp and hard from the wrists and shoulders, trying to show someone how to step in and use his weight and use his limbs to get into a ball and hit it. Image number 9, that's down at the bottom on the extreme left-hand side. It's showing George describing how to catch a hot line drive. He says, interlock the thumbs in order to keep the ball from going through your hands. He's trying to explain how to use your best capabilities to catch a baseball that's a hot shot coming right at you. The next image, image 10, which is on the bottom, second from the left. This is Ross Barnes demonstrating how to field a hot line or a hot ground ball. Place your heels together and bring your hands together as the ball reaches you. Should the ball pass under your hands, it'll be stopped by your feet. And he's explaining to people the rudimentary effort that could help you play a game of baseball if you were unfamiliar with it. And this type of approach was something that was very unusual to people in the sporting public who wanted to learn how to play baseball, but couldn't really do it except seeing or reading, in this case, about it. Now, Spalding took a different tact. He didn't write, but he published, and he published a lot related to sports from a sporting guide standpoint. His first guide was a baseball guide in 1878, and it was an accompaniment to an official league guide that he had already put out for the National League, which had a compendium of statistics and a history of the game for the National League. Well, his book, or his baseball guide, was a next step that talked about not only statistics, rules and regulations, but it talked about tips on how to play the game better. He would get experts to write about how to pitch, how to throw a curveball, how to hit better, how to lay down a bunt, how to field, how to run the bases. And in addition to that, of course, the last part of his official baseball guides were, let's talk about the equipment that you need to play the game, right? Here's the equipment that Spalding and Brothers offers. He also allowed other people to advertise in the Spalding official baseball guide. George Wright was not putting out a baseball guide. Here's on the right-hand side, the one-page advertisement that George Wright put in Albert Spalding's official baseball guide. Spalding let Wright put this in for a fee. What did it cover? The unique catcher's mask that was being developed by Fred Thayer, patented by Thayer. Wright had the sole licensing rights to that, to sell it into the marketplace. But George Wright also was talking about, yeah, I have Spalding's baseball bats, baseballs, scorebooks. I represent Spalding goods in New England. Spalding was more than happy to advertise for George Wright, and he did it for Al Reach, who was a retired second baseman from the Philadelphia Athletics, who had gone into sporting goods. These guys advertised on a regular basis in this annual compendium. There were other sporting guides that Spalding wanted to put out. In 1878 or 79, you can see he already had what he called Spalding's Journal of American Sports, which talked about a whole host of sports and sporting publications that you could buy for a dime, a quarter, even up to $1. There were 18 particular sports and activities that were detailed here. By 1900, there were 50 that were detailed, all for a dime. Pay a dime, learn how to play the sport, learn it from the experts, and, oh, by the way, here are the sporting goods that I, Albert Spalding and Brothers, can offer you to play the game even better. Now, Wright's effort in this area, journals and guides, was more focused and not as intense as Spalding's. He started out with, in 1881, a journal that he called the Journal of American Pastimes. And you see here, there's a picture on the front page of this newspaper type journal. It was all of 6 pages that talked about the new sport of lawn tennis. He was trying to get people interested in a sport that he could sell rackets, balls, tennis nets, equipment to set up the game of tennis. Well, in those 6 pages that he had, he told other things as well, but tennis was his lead in there. In the Union Association's sole year of existence, in 1884, George had bought into a Boston team, and as a reward, the Union Association gave him the right to publish their baseball guide. Al Reach had already published the American Association Guide in 1882, and so Spalding had the National League, Reach with the American Association, and now George Wright with the Union Association. Union Association also gave him the right to sell baseballs to the league, the right to sell uniforms, that type of thing. Wright also published, as Wright and Ditson, guides on sports where he was trying to have individuals become interested and play or watch. This polo guide in the mid-1880s, it refers to a sport that was very popular in the 1880s and early 1890s called roller polo, which basically was ice hockey on roller skates. You can imagine players, 6 players to a team on roller skates in an indoor roller rink with field hockey type clubs swinging at a rubber ball that's bouncing wildly all around. The mayhem was just unbelievable as people would crash into each other. There were cuts and fights and all sorts of different things. The public loved it. It was terrific. They got what they came to see, a heart-pounding game of roller polo. And oh, by the way, if you want to play roller polo the right way, you basically have to buy my equipment and take into account the tips that I have for you. Golf was the same thing, as Wright and Ditson brought in clubs from Scotland and taught people how to play and set up golf courses in New England. Even physical culture, how to stay in good shape at home. Just buy my gymnasium equipment. I'll teach you how to use it, and away we go. So Wright did a similar type of sport journal type of effort, but nothing like Spalding was able to do. There were other superstar player authors. You might call them authors, mostly ghostwritten stories for people like King Kelly and Cap Anson, their autobiographies, which basically talked about their adventures, their teammates, stories of the diamond, if you will. But the one in the middle here, John Montgomery Ward, he didn't want to write a book like that. He wanted to teach people how to play baseball. When you read baseball, how to become a player, it's delineated chapter by chapter into pitcher, catcher, first base, second base, outfield, batters. How do you play a better game of baseball? That's what John Ward wanted to teach. By 1911, Spalding actually did write a book. It was over 500 pages, and it was his tribute to America's national game. He wanted to blend together the game's values with American values and show how proud he was of what he had participated in the 1860s through the early 1900s. It was a tremendous success. It's really a seminal text on the early years of baseball. And all of this leads to, what were the Scribes trying to accomplish? They were promoting the game. Tom Gilbert talked about it last year in a presentation. Promotion of the game was so important so that people would not only embrace it, but play it. And of course, buy equipment from Spalding or George Wright or others. In playing the game, these publications were trying to explain how to play it better, how you can be successful at it, and there are other games that you can play that are exciting in their own right. So these particular people, George Wright and Spalding, were really trying to get across much more than how to play the game by watching how they played, but they tried to explain to the public what the next steps were that you could take. This is all detailed in my book, Selling Baseball, which is available at the Giamatti Research Center, and I'd like to thank you and ask you for any questions.
We've only got time for about one or two, so.
There, yeah. How do I rank Grantland Rice? Grantland Rice was a sports writer in the 20s and 30s, and he didn't try to promote sports as well as promote the players and the individual personalities. From Ty Cobb in the early 1900s to Knute Rockne and Babe Ruth and who else? There you go. Red Grange. I think he was trying to create not a myth, but a higher standard of player for people to buy into. I don't think he was quite the sports promoter that an Albert Spalding or a George Wright was. Other questions?
Thank you, Jeff. That was wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.